you might
I
ask.
wanted to ask you because the most controversial president in our history, and I say most controversial because he's probably the most genocidal, but he also accomplished quite a bit, and I think that that's why it's been a whitewashed history, is of course President Jackson and his responsibility with, for the Trail of Tears. Just a person who embodied the imagery of all natives are savages and they must all be killed. Or if they're not killed, they must all move as far west as can possibly be that I can't see them. He really was a mass murderer in every sense of the word. And, a lot of times people want to just look at him as a war hero, which he was in the War of 1812. But just because you had one component of your life that was considered endearing to this country, you cannot whitewash away the horrific nature in which he embodied his presidency. It was terrible what he did.
I would agree with that. And I would state, because it will actually be more convicting for more people, there is no difference between Abraham Lincoln and Andrew Jackson.
Thank you.
They were both just as genocidal, just as white supremacists. And actually, what I would say is what made Abraham Lincoln more dangerous than Andrew Jackson, because right now it's kind of acceptable or even expected that most people will call out Andrew Jackson, just like we will call out the Confederate generals and the Confederacy, but we won't call out Abraham Lincoln. And Abraham Lincoln, not only was he literally in the, so we have the Trail of Tears for the Cherokee, the Choctaw, the Chickasaw, those other nations. In New Mexico, we have what's called the Long Walk, where my people, the Navajo people and the Mescalero Apache, were in the same way that Andrew Jackson did. Abraham Lincoln rounded up our people, marched 10,000 of us down to Bosque Redondo, put us in essentially a death camp where we remained in prison until Abraham Lincoln was assassinated. A quarter of our people died while imprisoned in that death camp.
And yeah, people don't know these things.
And even if you read Abraham Lincoln's Thanksgiving Day proclamation in November of 1863, and you compare that to the history of the prior year, Abraham Lincoln is calling for a day of Thanksgiving to thank God for the fruits of the genocide he had been committing in the prior 12 months. It's absolutely disgusting. And not only that, his legacy, the 13th Amendment, right? So he already stated he was a white supremacist. He already said he had no intention of making voters or jurors of Negroes or allowing them to hold office. He was even asked by Judge Stephen Douglas if he believed if the Declaration of Independence applied to Black people, and he said he didn't believe so. And so when he became president, he had a problem, which is he wanted to end chattel slavery, but he had no intention of treating Black people as equal. And he actually was looking for a way. In his inaugural address, the day of his inauguration, Congress passed what's called the Corwin Amendment. The Corwin Amendment was to try to keep the state from seceding from the Union, and it constitutionally protected slavery in the states where it already existed. Abraham Lincoln, in his inaugural address, voiced his support for that and personally sent letters to all the governors asking them to ratify that amendment. It never got ratified. So the 13th Amendment we did get is the one that doesn't actually abolish slavery, right? The 13th Amendment says neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for crime, whereof the party has been duly convicted, shall exist. Abraham Lincoln didn't abolish slavery. He redefined and codified it under the jurisdiction of the criminal justice system. And today, our criminal justice system incarcerates people of color. We incarcerate our citizens at the highest rate of any country in the world. And we incarcerate people of color at 3 to 5 times the rate we incarcerate white people. Abraham Lincoln gave us the tools we are using today to strip civil rights from people of color.
Yeah, it always made me wonder because the worst president in our history is Andrew Johnson. And it never ceased to amaze me how Lincoln, who is regarded as our greatest president, was put on the ticket. It never really, they called it the, the unity ticket. But I mean, the things that Andrew Johnson did in regards to Reconstruction and how much devastation he did in such a short period of time to not just Black Americans, but Native Americans. Mm-hmm. I mean, we can talk about the fact that he was, I think, one vote away from being impeached, would have been the first impeached president at that time. But no one really talks about the fact that Lincoln did have him on his ticket. And I think that if Johnson was as bad as he was, did Lincoln really have that bad a judgment when it came to recognizing the people that were around him or the ideas that were being espoused?
See, you're still running with the understanding that Abraham Lincoln was a good guy.
Yeah, he can't get past this. He's not going to get past this.
No, I'm not saying that.
Abraham Lincoln was a blatant white supremacist.
Okay, so Mark, let me just tell you this. So over the summer, one of the books that I listened to, I do audiobooks, I cheat now, but anyway, was Margaret Kimberly's Prejudential. And I don't know if you're familiar with Margaret Kimberly, but she's a historian and she's an author, and she basically went through each president was a chapter, and each president, and she spoke from what was their effect on the Black community and African Americans, on slavery, on and where we were at any point in history. And it's really from that perspective. And once I listened to that, and I told him this, they're all horrible.